And that leads on quite nicely then to the conversation around the difference between strategy and tactics and how they're often mistaken for each other. Can you give us your sort of definition of each and tell us where you think the process starts?
Yeah, so strategy, along with a number of other words, is a contender for the most misused word in business. I think brand is in there, innovation, disruption. So there's lots of other words that are misused quite frequently in business, but strategy is right up there with them. Strategy and tactics often confused. To keep it really simple, one word, one sentence answer. Strategy is where you're going. Tactics is how you're going to get there. So when I hear people say, "Oh, I'm a strategic Facebook marketer," I do always think that's possible, but you're a strategic tactical marketer. Facebook is a tactic. That's it. Or even when I hear strategic social media marketer, I think, oh, potentially, but you've tagged yourself to a channel right straight away, to social media. What if your audience is on radio? You can't be strategic. So where are you going? So strategy is where are you going to go? And if you take it, we are going to go from Belfast to Dublin. That's the strategy. The tactics is, how are we going to get there? Are we going to drive? Are we going to cycle? Are we going to get the bus? Are we going to get the train? Are we going to go and pick someone up in Lisburn on the way? Are we going to stop? Are we going to pull in at somewhere and get some food? That's the tactics of how we're going to get there. But we're still going to end up in Dublin. There are different ways of doing it. Strategy for me is about answering three questions. 1, who we're targeting. 2, why would they buy from us? And 3, what are our smart objectives? So you look at those three things separately and we'll pull them apart. So first of all, who are we targeting? Persona work is fairly widespread in marketing, not definitely, but it's about understanding who are you going to target, what groups are we going to do. Doesn't have to be demographic based. You can look at demographics where people decide based on their age, we're going to target women in the 40s who are housewives, who have 3 kids and drive this sort of car. Demographic targeting seems to come in and out of fashion. I think for certain products and services it works really well. But there are times where it doesn't work. I also like to look at maybe psychographic targeting, so where people are clustered together by their behaviour rather than by their age. There are 50-year-olds who carry on like 20-year-olds, and just because you're a mum, you could be 16, you could be 36, you could be 46. So it's about the sort of behavioural traits that they have in common. So the key thing for me with that is to be able to just group people together with the problem that you solve for them, which takes us into that which is where the next bit sits. Why would they buy from us? What problems are you solving for those people? And going back to the guy in the 20s who said about don't sell the sausage, sell the sizzle. That's really what problems are you solving for them? Not what products can you sell to them, but what problems do you solve for them? They're buying your product because you're making their life easier. Something's happening quicker because they like. Just understand what you buy from them, and you can start to get a little bit deeper with that as well, especially from talking to customers, focus groups and feeding into that. Again, focus groups go out of fashion. People go, oh, well, there's only 6 people there, that's it. If you do focus groups properly, you get the right information. If you do it badly, you're going to get bad information, right? But you understand who are you targeting, what are these groups of people, and you understand why these groups of people are going to buy from you. Now, before I go on to the smart objectives bit, the key thing about strategies, I often say to people, strategy is about what we're not going to do. When you map out the number of groups of people who might buy from you, I've done this with clients and we've got to sort of 25 to 30 groups of people. And you start to look at that and you go, oh, that's great, but have you got the budget to target all of them at the same time? Do you have the capacity? Has your team got the breadth to be able to cover all of those? And the answer is always no. So the key with strategy is being able to focus on something. Which ones of these are your high value customers or your frequent customers, or what's the bullseye in that target? You could map them all on a target and go, right, well, they only buy infrequently and they buy regularly, but they don't spend much money. These are the ones who buy big and buy, right, okay, bullseye customer. So once you've got those laid out, you can then set your smart objectives. What are you going to achieve? And this is where marketers tend to annoy me, and not just annoy me, annoy the boards and the senior people they work with, because this is, I think, where they miss it. When you look at what digital channels offer you, they offer you endless metrics, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of ways of measuring the success of a campaign. So people tend to look at what metrics they're told by Google or Facebook are good metrics, or what they read in blogs and talk about click-through rates and return on advertising spend, and some even hard metrics about return on investment and things like that. But to me, they miss the point a little bit, because they're not looking at what a board's looking at. They're looking at sales volumes, they're looking at average customer order values and things like that. And that's where you need to start by measuring your campaigns with what matters to the board should be what matters to you. And put that as the key thing. And then underneath that pyramid, yes, you still absolutely need to measure your digital analytics if digital is a channel you're going down, and your TV analytics if you're using TV, or your radio analytics if you're doing that. You absolutely need to measure those, but in the context of what are you measuring and what are you reporting to the board.
I was at a Chartered Institute of Marketing event last week, and we had Alex Aiken from the Director of the Government Communications Service over. And he started off by asking people in the room what their understanding of what strategy was. And he likened it to a situation. He said, luckily at the cabinet meetings, he's lucky enough to sit beside the Chief of the Defence Forces. And he said, if you're going to talk to anybody about strategy, talk to an army guy. And the guy said to him that there's people overcomplicate strategy sometimes, and it's about three things. It's about ends, ways, and means. So ends are the goals, that the smart objectives and the goals of the destination that you want to get to. The ways are the tactics you're going to employ to get you there. But the means, then, he says, in his opinion, it's often the means where people fall down, because the means are the human and the financial resources available to you to deliver that. And the best strategies take account of a balance of all those three things, because anything is achievable. The problem with marketing stuff is that it's all potentially achievable with the right resources in place, both human and financial. So is that, I mean, do you agree with that that's where campaigns fall down sometimes, that people set the tactics and the strategy without an appreciation for what they've actually got available to them to deliver it?
So the framework I use, which is one I developed, I'll not take you through the whole thing, but there's two important C's. It's a seven questions framework, I call it, and every question starts with a C. And the two are competence and capital are the two crucial and often missed ones. And the competence is with the result. Competence is the people one. With the people and the skills you have available, is this deliverable? And what that throws up and what that gap analysis shows you is maybe where do you need to bring an agency in, what skill, or maybe what recruitment you need to do, or maybe it just says, well, actually we can't achieve all of these things because we don't have that resource to do it. And capital is, do you have a big enough pot of gold to make these things happen? Because without those two things being understood, you can't quite get to where you want to go. So I was talking to the chief exec of a 30-40 million pound turnover company. They're in the beauty industry. And he'd come from P&G and gone to work there. And really interesting conversation. He said that his biggest challenge as MD of that company was pacing. And I said, what do you mean by pacing? And he went, every day I've got an in-tray for the company that could have 20 or 30 things on it. And we can't do them all at once, because if I throw them all at the team, none of them will get done. If I don't throw enough of them at the team, we don't move fast enough, and someone will overtake us. And my job is to pace the activity that gets done. Sometimes it means pushing hard, sometimes it means understanding that they're running us at full throttle and we need to ease back a little bit. But I've got to get that pacing right, because if you're not running fast enough, your competitors are going to go past you. And if you're trying to throw too many things at your team, it's going to die. And that's to me, that was a different way of framing that. Have you got a big enough pot of gold, and have you got the people? Now, so that also looks at a little bit, have you got the right people to do that? Because sometimes you could have the right number of bums on seats, but just the wrong skills, or not having the willingness. And that's a different element of getting the right people on the bus, as Jim Collins would call it, getting the right people in the right seats. But yeah, it's interesting when you talk about the military angle to strategy, because most of what we see in business strategy these days has spun out of the military. So at the end of the First World War, a lot of the US generals were demobbed and ended up going into places like General Motors and big US firms, which had spectacular growth. If you think of the end of the First World War, those huge periods of growth that hit sort of the US economy, the invention of sort of Henry Ford putting everything on a production line, and then that sustained period of growth that took them through the Great Depression, I took them through the Second World War into the 50s. They kept growing and they kept growing. It was only really with the introduction of the Japanese cars into the American market in the late 60s, probably 70s, that saw the big companies like Chevrolet and GM starting to falter. And even then they've come back. And all of those big bits of strategy have been studied to death by the big US business schools, which then spin out and influence the rest of the academic world, certainly the academic Western world. So most of what you read about strategy is based on the tenets of what the US did in the First World War. The only slight concern I have with that being taught in business schools and with that being pushed around by government organisations who support businesses is that it can be, people think, I would say if you stopped 100 business people and said, what does a strategic document look like to you? They're going to think of a 50-page volumes of lots of detail, lots of depth, and 2-day away days for the senior team, and this is how you have to cook up strategy. And that seems to have sort of spun out of that thinking and that process from the US military days. Now, I don't necessarily think that's how the US military did strategy. I think it's just how it hit the business world, trying to keep a company that was the size of GM going through various different bits and bobs. But that's almost how people think strategy is now. And I think most businesses, or most smaller businesses anyway, could have a marketing strategy that covers one sheet of paper. And if you answer those 3 questions, who are you targeting? Why would they buy from you? What are your objectives? I mean, you need a bit of depth behind it about what are the tactics. That's the next bit. How are you going to get there? What tactics are you going to use? But if you can have that one-page strategy, if someone joins your organisation, that's what we do. This is how we do it. That's what we do. Oh, great. So
I mean, surely it's in theory it should never have been as easy to create a focused strategy that should work, because we've never had access to the volume of data that we now have.
Yep.
But that, I remember we speak quite a lot with Fiona Rooney up at Ipsos Mori, and interested in coming from their background, their expertise as a research company. She would always say that, the research is just information. The trick is the interpretation of that information. So, it takes us on quite nicely to, we've talked about the overarching strategy, but now when we start looking at tactics and how we work out what channels are going to work best for us, there's been a growth and a real focus on digital marketing tactics over the last number of 20 years, because you can see those things in a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
So that has created a very focus on short-term sales objectives. There are, as you've already mentioned, important successes to be gained from brand building campaigns. So can you talk to us a little bit about what your feelings are on the requirement for brand building campaigns at top of funnel and then sales activation tactics at the bottom of funnel, and why those 2 things are important?